Let me start out by saying this is actually the result of a request I received a while back to do a what if style video. Originally, it was going to be a what if Luke left for the Imperial Academy, but it's kind of morphed into something else over time. Now, this is obviously a departure from my more theory based videos, so please let me know what you think. If you like it, let me know and maybe I'll do more like it in the future. If not, maybe this will be my one and only attempt. And without further ado, I present a different version of the start of the Star Wars saga we all know and love. Now, imagine you're watching A New Hope for, I don't know, the 100th time in your life, and everything is going as usual until you get to that scene early in the movie where R2 and 3PO hop into an escape pod and jettison off into space, making for Tatooine with a message for Obi-Wan Kenobi from Princess Leia. And of course, the hard-earned plans to the Death Star, and we know just how hard-earned they are now thanks to Rogue One. You then get to the scene where two Imperial gunners notice the escape pod the droids are in, and one tells the other to hold his fire because there are no life signs on board, because apparently the Empire is trying to conserve ammo. But then the other gunner then says, hey, maybe the plans we're looking for have been hidden on board, and they're trying to get them to someone on the planet. And he opens fire, blowing up the escape pod, along with our favorite two droids, and likely any hope the rebellion ever had of blowing up the Death Star. The first gunner then sighs and says, if the plans were on board that escape pod, we'll never know it, and I think you should be the one who tells that to Lord Vader. You then come to a scene on Tatooine, and for a moment you think everything is back to normal, only it's one of the deleted scenes from A New Hope where Biggs and Luke talk about the rebellion. Only this one too doesn't seem to line up to how you remember it from the Blu-ray extras. Biggs is telling his lifelong friend Luke that he's joined the rebellion, and that they are in desperate need of good pilots. Luke, of course, is intrigued by all this and mentions how he had plans on transferring his application to the Imperial Academy this season, even if his uncle forbids it. He just feels like he needs to get off Tatooine already, that there's something else waiting for him out there. Biggs then tells him about some of the horrors and atrocities the Empire has committed, those you certainly don't see on the Nightly Hollow News, and that perhaps that something else out there that Luke is looking for is the rebellion, and that they would gladly take on a pilot of his caliber. He even offers to take Luke with him right there and then to the rebellion. Luke considers it, but says he can't just leave his aunt and uncle, not right before the harvest. Biggs understands and gives him information how to get in contact with an agent named Fulcrum should he ever change his mind about joining the rebellion. We then jump to a scene where Vader is speaking calmly to an Imperial officer, while we see behind him he is choking an Imperial gunner to death. The officer, trying to focus and pay no mind to the dying gunner, informs Lord Vader that they have completed the scans of the pod debris field and discovered the remains of at least two droids. The officer then concludes that Princess Leia had given the plans to the droids who may have been trying to get them to someone on the planet below. After all, why else would she jump to this system unless there was a rebel cell here that could help her? The officer asks Vader if they should send a detachment down to the planet to investigate. All the while, Vader is slowly walking over to a view screen and then takes a good long look at the planet of Tatooine below, his former home. There is a good long pause before Vader tells him no, they are to leave the system immediately. There is nothing down there worth investigating. We then find ourselves back on Tatooine, where Luke and Uncle Owen are purchasing droids from Jawas, only this time R2 and C-3PO are obviously not in the lineup. We hear Owen complaining that they again don't have a droid who can speak Bocce, and decides to just take the red one, who starts rolling forward, only to malfunction. Frustrated, Owen tells the Jawas to just go, and this is followed by a scene between Owen and Luke, where Owen tells him how thankful he is to still have him around, since they're not going to have the help they thought they'd have during the harvest. Luke kind of gives a face and nods, to which Owen asks what's wrong now. But instead of answering, Luke just asks if it'd be okay if tomorrow he went to Anchorhead to pick up some power converters. Reluctantly, Owen agrees. We then see that classic shot of Darth Vader's Star Destroyer, the Annihilator, approaching the Death Star, and then it cuts to the meeting of top Imperial officers, which at first glance seems like it always has, until we learn it has now become a discussion on how the rebellion has become so organized that they were not only able to defeat them at Scarif, but to almost obtain the plans to the Death Star had Lord Vader not stopped them. They discuss Krennic's failures, and how his hasty testing of the Death Star at Jeddah has forced the Emperor to up his timetable, and that he has now disbanded the Galactic Senate permanently. Finally, they all agree their top priority is now to find the secret rebel base, and the best way to do that is to get information from the former Senator, Princess Leia. Next, we're back on Tatooine the following morning, and Luke is about to get in his speeder and head off to Anchorhead when his uncle stops him and tells him that before he goes he needs to help his aunt with a few things. Luke whines a bit, and Owen tells him that he can waste time with his friends later, to which Luke is about to respond but doesn't. Instead it is Owen, who in a much gentler tone now, tells him that he understands that he doesn't want to spend his entire life here as a farmer, that once they can get some new droids, they will again talk about forwarding his application to the Academy, though he thinks Luke should consider other options besides joining the Empire. Luke fires back, like what? Being just a spice freighter navigator like my father? Owen frowns and starts to walk away, and Luke shouts to him, "Why do you refuse to ever tell me about my father?" Owen tells him to just go and help his aunt. Then he can do whatever he wants with the rest of his day and the rest of his life if he wants to get away from his family so bad. Our next scene is just like it's always been. Vader enters Princess Leia's cell and tells her that they are now going to discuss the location of the secret rebel base. And then we're back on Tatooine, and Luke is helping his aunt with, well, whatever. She, of course, can see something is troubling Luke and asks him what's wrong. Luke, after a few attempts, reluctantly asks why they don't ever tell him more about his father. Beru, who does actually know his father is Darth Vader, according to a source book that is canon, tells Luke that his father was just caught up with the wrong people and went off and got himself killed, and they don't want to see the same thing happen to him. Luke then asks very seriously, "Can you at least tell me, am I like him? Am I like my father?" Beru doesn't know what to say and finally simply says, "You remind me of the good parts of him," and then the scene ends. We're then back on the Death Star, and Vader is telling Tarkin how the princess's resistance to the mind probe is considerable. Tarkin finds this curious and starts to ask, considerable enough to be, but Vader cuts him off and tells him no, he does not sense that she is strong with the Force, which of course you, the viewer of this alternate version of Star Wars, would find to be a little odd, knowing later to be his daughter who does indeed have some aptitude with the Force. Nevertheless, you hope this will be explained later and keep watching, and see that, as it has always been, Tarkin suggests an alternate way to get the information from her and tells them to set course for Alderaan. We're then taken yet again back to Tatooine, and Luke is with his friends in Anchorhead, but is clearly not having a good time. All his talk about his father has put him into a mood, and soon he just decides to hop into his speeder and starts heading off in the direction of the Dune Sea just to clear his head. We're then taken back to the Death Star, and get a scene that is almost identical to the real version between Leia, Tarkin, and Vader. Tarkin threatens to use the Death Star to blow up Leia's home planet of Alderaan if she doesn't give up the location of the secret rebel base. Leia, of course, tells him it's on Tatooine, where the base used to be, but to demonstrate the full power of the Death Star that is yet to be unleashed on either Jedha or Scarif, Tarkin orders the entire planet destroyed. After we watch Alderaan destroyed, we are taken immediately to a scene of Obi-Wan meditating in his humble little abode on Tatooine, when suddenly his eyes shoot open, and we can hear the screams of millions that suddenly get silenced. It takes Obi-Wan a moment or two to settle himself, but when he does, he begins to meditate again, and we hear the classic Yoda theme music begin. And then the voice of the old Jedi Master tells Obi-Wan that something horrible the Sith hath created. Powerful Sidious has become, but overconfident. Come the time finally has. See the twins being trained, he will not. Bring them both to me, you must. We're then back with Luke and his speeder heading out across the Dune Sea when one of his engines blows, and we soon realize that's because a Tusken Raider has hit it with a lucky rifle shot and sent Luke and his speeder spinning out of control. The scene then starts to feel very familiar as the Tusken Raiders are rummaging through Luke's speeder until Obi-Wan shows up and scares them away with a crate dragon scream. And then he wakes up Luke, who is again very happy to see Ben Kenobi, but that's where the scene becomes totally different. Old Ben tells Luke that his name isn't Ben at all, that he's actually Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that he's an old friend of his father's. Luke immediately perks up after hearing this and wants to know more, but Obi-Wan reminds him that Tusken Raiders will be back and in greater numbers. The first thing they must do is fix the speeder and make for Mos Eisley. Luke laughs, saying that his uncle had warned him that old Ben was crazy, but he didn't know he'd be this crazy, that he appreciates him saving his life, but there's no chance he's taking him anywhere, much less Mos Eisley. Obi-Wan sighs, and from his robes he pulls Anakin's lightsaber and tells Luke that, "I took this from your father after he was betrayed and murdered by a former student of mine, vowing someday to give it to his son to help make things right." Luke will of course ask what it is, to which Obi-Wan will tell him and explain that, much like he did in the real version, that it's a lightsaber, the weapon of a Jedi, and he'll give him a brief description of what the Force is. He will then tell him that he must come with him to Alderaan, so that he too can learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like his father. Luke will scoff at all this and say that he can't leave his aunt and uncle, especially to go to Alderaan of all places, which will make him stop to think for a moment, and then he'll ask, well, why Alderaan anyway? Obi-Wan then seems to wrestle with just what and how much to say before finally telling Luke, we must go to Alderaan because that's where your sister is, and I fear something horrible has happened there, and because you are both to be trained as Jedi. Luke will of course tell him that he has no sister, that this is all crazy, and if his speeder wasn't damaged he would just leave him here. He's never heard of the Force or of Jedi, and if his father had been one, his aunt and uncle would have told him and not lied to him all these years about it, and kept the truth about his father from him. But it's as Luke says that he seems to really start to consider what Obi-Wan has told him. Obi-Wan then says, "You know all this to be true. You can feel it. You can feel your destiny. Close your eyes, quiet your mind, and let the Force flow through you." Luke seems skeptical, but tries it anyway, and after a few seconds blurts out, "Nothing's happening." Obi-Wan replies, "You are as impatient as your father once was. Now quiet your mind and stretch out with your feelings, and through the Force you will see more than you could ever see with your eyes." Luke gives a little shrug and tells him, "I'll give it a try." Obi-Wan seems like he's about to say something about trying, but instead says nothing. This time, of course, Luke closes his eyes and the Force theme quietly begins to play. And after a few moments, he announces that he can see something, a young woman, and she's beautiful, but that she's afraid and in some kind of trouble. Luke finally opens his eyes and sees Obi-Wan nodding in approval and seemingly very much impressed. Obi-Wan then says that it is your sister you see, that it must be your bond with her that allows you to see her, for she is almost impossible to see and feel through the Force. Even Master Yoda cannot see her. "Master who?" Luke will immediately ask, but Obi-Wan just smiles and says something about all in good time. Luke lets it drop and simply says, "We have to help her." Obi-Wan nods and says, "To Alderaan then, but first we're going to need a ship and a pilot to get us there." And thus concludes part 1. Now if you liked this video and would like a part 2 to finish off this version of episode 4 someday, let me know in the comments below. If you didn't like it and think this should be my first and last video of this nature, you can also let me know that. And don't worry, you won't hurt my feelings if you didn't like it. And with that, I'll ask you to please check out some of my other videos and subscribe if you liked what you see. If you're already a subscriber, then thanks for your continued support and for making it this far into a totally new type of video for me. If you want to know when I upload new videos, including a possible part 2 to this, then hit the notification button or just follow me on Twitter. And as always, thanks for watching.